go straight to our next panel. Almost half of me wants to give a time check because that's what I do in my morning job, but it's kind of pointless, I suppose, isn't it? So anyway, it doesn't matter what the time is. We're just going to go straight to our next panel, and we have plenty of time to talk to them and once again to hear your questions as well about it. It is horses for courses. It's finding the right solution for the right vehicles. We're going to look, we're going to have a conversation, the same conversation, sort of conversation that we've just had, but we will also start in the same way that we've started the last panel discussion. So an introduction to our panellists and to the topics that they want to discuss.
The pace of change differs around the world, and what's most important is we give customers right now the power to choose a car, the greenest car for them, according to their own environment and lifestyle.
At Bosch, we are, in one hand, still improving the efficiency of combustion engine, and in the other hand, developing powertrain components for hybrid, battery electric and fuel cell vehicle.
Toyota has a technology agnostic or neutral approach. Our range proposes a variety of low-emission technologies to meet different customers' requirements, and we're expanding our offer on all powertrains.
The competition between the engineer working on the different solution will be stimulating for the efficiency, sustainability and affordability of the end product.
In terms of investment, 40% of our R&D expense is into new technologies, such as powertrains for the future.
While electric cars may be the obvious choice for some consumers, it won't be necessarily the one size fits all.
You have seen them on tape and now you can see them live. They join us all live. Antonio, Graeme and Richard, welcome. Thank you very much for spending the time with us this morning, or indeed this afternoon. Graeme, you said in your video there that a one-size-fits-all solution will not work, will not necessarily work. I think the words you used. Why not?
Well, I think it's important as an industry that we offer customers the ability to choose. You know, it's clear the future is migrating towards electric, whether that's purely battery or includes fuel cells, but we're on a journey. And, you know, BEV is a perfect option for some consumers at the moment, but it's less practical if you're a high mileage user or don't have access to charging at work or home charging. And, you know, the efficiency of petrol and diesel cars is improving still dramatically year by year. So while we're moving towards an electric future, we've got to allow customers to choose the best product now that both fits their requirements and allows them to be sustainable.
Antonio, you agree?
Totally, of course. We have to think that the word mobility is a very simple word, but currently everybody is having a different opinion what mobility means. And you have people living in the city and embracing already the share economy, who will have very different needs that the people living on the countryside or the people making delivery service, lorry driver and so on. So yes, a lot of technology will be on the market to cover the need of all these people.
Yeah, and the range of technology, Antonio, needs to be there with it, doesn't it? So in other words, it's not just that the technology should be available, but that we are going to have concentrated on thinking about making it available. I'm just thinking back to the discussion we've just had in our previous panel about hydrogen and about the kind of the whole idea that there are avenues that people need to be exploring now.
Yes, that's correct. Your question, you make partly already the answer. You know, for the end customer, what is important is that they know their needs, their own needs, and they take a vehicle with a technology who is for the environment, coping with the challenge of the environment, and shouldn't be thinking about, oh, what should I take a car for this? This is a task from us engineers to come on that. Again, you take the keyword hydrogen and fuel cell. Of course, in the moment that you have a driver having a high mileage with heavy payload, then the hydrogen will excel. This is really a very good technology. Taking into account that, of course, the production of the hydrogen is a green one, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Richard, the end user, I mean, I suppose the point is to turn it all round and say that what the end user is going to want is the important thing, because they're going to have to be persuaded to take part in this revolution. How important, from the perspective of end users, is it going to be that there is a technology neutral approach?
Technology is going to develop continuously. We can see that over the last 10 or 15 years, and it'll continue to develop. It will get cheaper, it will get capabilities will improve, infrastructures will develop, and so for the customers, they need to be able to choose the product which works for them at that particular time. And as that evolution happens, I think a lot of people have said in the last session about, we shouldn't take, mobility has fundamentally been good for society, and we shouldn't take a step back from that.
Yeah, and in that case, following on from that then, Richard, what is being done to make the advanced propulsion systems of tomorrow cleaner than they've been, cleaner than ever?
Well, clearly the goal that everyone's working towards is zero emissions. And as Antonio said, there's different ways to achieve that in terms of storing electricity. I mean, Toyota, clearly we're looking at fuel cells, as is Bosch, as is BMW, but also battery electric. It's just a way of storing that energy. But it's how that energy is then generated. So probably the next step is not necessarily how we measure the emissions at the tailpipe, but at for the total life cycle carbon footprint. That's how we'll make a bigger input over the future.
Yeah, this is something, Antonio, that we focused on a little bit in the previous panel as well. In fact, a couple of questions were asked about it. That's seeing when you think of what is being done to make advanced propulsion systems cleaner, it has got to take into account everything from the beginning of that system to whenever its end is.
Exactly, and this is a point I wanted to emphasize here, also linked to the previous question. We are, of course, talking and thinking local emission, but we have really to take the whole chain, as you said, the whole utilization chain, but also the production chain, of the goods at the end. And this is the reason why, when you are taking that into consideration, I will make, let's say, a simple picture saying, of course, small car with small mileage inside the city, there will be surely nothing better than the pure battery electric vehicle. The lorry, as I said, with heavy payload, there will be the hydrogen solution. I personally have no doubt on that. And you have in between a range of car where when you consider that we need also to have a solution for the vehicle currently on the market, that means that you need to have also some fuel who are CO2 neutral from the fuel, so-called sometimes we talk about e-fuels. Then it makes also an area of usage for plug-in hybrids who are still having a combustion engine, but with the e-fuels who could be totally neutral from the CO2 point of view.
Right, let's focus for a second on EVs and do it with you, Graeme, and this business that it's kind of been there. It's been the kind of the ghost in the room, the elephant in the room throughout the discussion today, starting off with what Mike Hawes said right at the beginning and going on through Grant Shapps, this business of what government policy is necessary to help with the uptake of EVs, and it's partly about incentivization, but it's also, of course, it's back to infrastructure, isn't it? Where do you see the absolutely essential things being?
Well, I think the two essential areas are an efficient and available charging infrastructure, and the second is incentives to actually drive people towards electric, and I'll come back to those one by one. It's clear on the last discussion some of the presenters were far more confident about the government's position than personally I am at the moment. I think there is still a long way to go, and only in the last week we've seen the government reducing the subsidy on EV cars, which seems counterintuitive to all the bold statements they made ahead of COP26. But if we look at infrastructure, that's a prerequisite for electric. There's got to be a ready, available, efficient charging network that all consumers have access to. Otherwise, BEVs will be a frustration to users. And that needs to be built on a very strong government platform. I accept industry needs to play a part, but significant government funding and particular clarity is required going forward. We need a rapid public charging system for mid-journey trips and longer distances. We need a clear policy on workplace charging to encourage consumers to go electric. And lastly, home charging will remain for a lot of customers a necessity. And a lot of people don't have off-street parking or the ability to charge at home. So we need an on-street solution. And the government really needs to stand behind that. And to be honest, we're a long way off the pace in making that happen. Grant earlier referred to our charging ratio versus Europe. I don't think it's about benchmarking against other countries. If we're going for a zero emission new vehicle policy for 2030, we're probably 5 or 10 years behind where we need to be in terms of charging structure.
Really, 5 or 10 years. That's fascinating. Because, listening to Mike Hawes right at the beginning, and he went through, I hadn't had those figures read out in a kind of long line before of the amount of charging stations per person in various parts of the UK. That is a really big and immediate task, isn't it?
No, it certainly is. And if you look at the plan for 2030 for BEV and 2035 for PHEV, that starts 9 years away. That's not a long time when you're talking about infrastructure projects. And clearly, you're going to have a growth in the number of BEVs at 2030. It's not going to be all cars on the road, still a high population ICEs, but we are still a long way from having a clear plan, in my mind anyway, and the necessary government investment to back up that charging structure. Clearly, it comes down to budget, and I recognise the government has a number of challenges, but they've also got to come up with a clear plan to incentivise consumers to move away from internal combustion to electric. Quite simply, electric cars are more expensive to manufacture, and therefore they're more expensive for consumers. And the government's got to do something to step in there. And we've seen that incentives really do drive a change. Norway, for me, would be the benchmark in terms of a clear 360-degree plan has really driven the electric market in Norway. I've not yet seen a clear plan from our government to do a similar thing. What I've also not seen is what the approach is going to be for end-of-life vehicles, because beyond 2030, what's the government plan to incentivise consumers to move away from their current ICE vehicles? And that's important for owners because it's a very large investment for a number of people, the car they own and sits on the drive or is parked on the road. So again, I use the expression 360. We need a fully integrated plan in consultation with the industry and driven by the SMMT that makes it clear to everyone. And if we've got a roadmap and a clear plan, we'll make it happen. I don't doubt that at all.
Richard, do you agree?
Very much so. I would probably extend it to also talk about infrastructure from a hydrogen point of view. We've got to be careful we don't go down one route. There's got to be incentives. We've got to somehow close the gap of cost of ownership in terms of many things. I was just looking back, we were talking about manufacturing. The combustion engine's been going for 120 years. And it's been evolved and fine-tuned to the point we are today. This is a brand new technology at the start of its life, and there will be a gap in terms of the costs. That's human nature, and therefore, if we want to make that change for society, then we've got to create a level playing field for the consumer.
And what about the role of industry in all of this, Graeme? Is industry embracing electrification, offering different types of technology enough to serve the various needs there'll be?
I certainly believe so. This has been a topic for industry for a long time. It's not the current flavour. All manufacturers have been working towards how they make their whole production process and the vehicles they produce more sustainable. Electric's a major part of that. We started as far back as the Munich Olympics in 1972 with our first prototype electric car. By 2023, we're going to have 25 electrified models available. We're working towards, now our CEO has been very clear, a fully electric portfolio in the future. So I think industry's there. I think we could get too hung up about the different technologies. The important thing is that we all work towards net zero. And I do believe that the industry as a whole is fully behind that. I think you also see a lot of cooperation and collaboration agreements between manufacturers on this topic to make sure we can do it quickly and we can do it in the most cost-effective way that means we can pass those benefits on to consumers.
Some questions coming in. Here's one from Adam Kobesi from CGI, and this is it. How do you balance the move to electric vehicle investment alongside the move towards subscription as a service mobility options when the investment product potentiality or potentially still sits on your own balance sheet? So what does it mean for pricing to the customer that balances return on investment and incentive to the customer to take up the actual electric vehicle? Graeme.
Wow, that's some question, isn't it? I think there's two parts to that. The first is the product itself, and we've talked about that quite a lot, and the very significant investment that's going in to drive that zero emission vehicle. And the way it's provided is the second, and the subscription model was referred to, but that's merely a supply model. And clearly, depending on how an organisation might want to do that, then there are clear fiscal considerations, including the balance sheet. But first and foremost, we need to have the right products available cost effectively, and we need to have a solid and available charging structure to make the whole thing work. How it's funded, that's something we can easily make the circle complete.
Antonio, your view?
I don't sell cars, so I will not really be able to answer this one. But in principle, yes. So the industry is currently investing a lot. So if this is hundreds of millions for every company every year. And this is several hundreds of millions for every company every year that is put on the table of electrification. So it's a big burden. And like every economy, this is paid by the current sellings. So as simple as that.
Richard, as simple as that.
Yeah, anyway, I'm a manufacturing guy, but clearly you can see the challenge of subscription. It's been talked about and you can start to see it come into the market. How quickly it comes in will depend upon consumer acceptance in terms of the subscription and the shared car. It may come in, and I think we just have to be more agile and ready to adapt as it comes through. Clearly, there are the huge challenges on the balance sheet at the moment. You know, connected cars, shared ownership, electrification, autonomous cars. These are all technologies that require some address.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from Nick Dunkley at Johnson Matthey. I believe a great proportion of car buyers struggle to know the right horse to buy. He says, what efforts are being done to simplify choice of vehicle based on the customer use case? So innovative thinking he's looking at, like the right to use a combustion engine car for a long journey if you've brought into their BV vehicle. So the kind of balance there, Graeme, is that something that, well, there is innovative thinking about?
Yeah, I think, well, there definitely is innovative thinking about it. I mean, we've done a lot of work as an individual manufacturer, particularly with our corporate sector, so business users, to provide them with some clear modelling that allows them to understand from a cost perspective the impact of the different technologies. That will become more and more available to consumers. I think the onus, though, is on us as an industry to try and find an easier way to talk about these things. You know, even on this call, we're talking a lot about technologies. You know, I'm not an engineer, I'm a chemist, but we can understand these things. A lot of consumers aren't interested in the technology discussion. They want to know what the emission of the vehicle is, and they want to know how sustainable it is. So this is something clearly that we've published data in the UK in terms of vehicle sustainability, almost like the fridge efficiency sticker. So I think the data is there, but we can certainly do more as an industry to make it clear to consumers what they will be buying. Because I think the question is true. If you asked a lot of people at the moment, they would just say electric is for now, and it will be for some people, but for many customers, electric is something in the near term, not right now.
Yeah, and on the subject of consumer choice, another one for you, I think, Graeme, is from Jack Hunsley from Automotive World. You've discussed the applicability of EVs for city users. How, Jack asks, can drivers be encouraged in rural locations to transition from combustion engine vehicles as well? What are the hurdles? How can they be overcome in pretty short order by 2030?
Yeah, I think whether you're a city dweller or you're operating rurally is probably less of an issue than the kind of mileage pattern you'll have and whether you can access a charging point. They're the key drivers. But I think this is where we go back to the early point. There needs to be some clear and sustainable government incentive plan to allow people to adopt electric. So whether it's assistance with installing a charging point, or whether it's assistance with the purchase or a lower taxation on the vehicle, there's got to be a complete offer to make sure consumers know which is the best way for them to go.
Well, what are your thoughts, all of your thoughts, on tax revenues from EV vehicles? This is from Kevin Boyce at Cadillac Europe. Is there going to be a different fee for home charging a vehicle or other? I suppose that's actually probably initially at least also a question for you, Graeme.
Yeah, this is the point that probably fascinates me most from a commercial perspective. Clearly, the government at the moment are drawing a very significant revenue into the exchequer from the taxation on petrol and diesel fuels. I've not yet seen any draft of how, if at all, that is going to be replaced in future from mobility, whether it will be on a usage charge or mileage charge or whatever. So that for me is the elephant in the room. It's how are the government going to support the infrastructure, provide the consumer incentives, and replace that lost revenue from success. So effectively, moving people away from petrol and diesel to electric will cost the government a very significant amount of lost revenue.
Can the revenue be made up through road charging? I mean, is that the obvious place that it goes?
I think there's a number of ways you can do it. It can be through the way that the purchase is taxed, the way the annual operation charge is made, or through individual road charges or tolls. But again, without repeating myself too much, what I've not seen yet is a clear plan of how that fits into this jigsaw. And if you're a consumer making a decision now or in the next few years about a car that you're going to own for between 3 and 5 years, you want to know what that cost is going to be through the whole life of ownership. You don't want any surprises where you buy an electric because you think it's going to save a lot of money, and then suddenly there becomes some relevant taxes to your purchase in future years which you're not aware of.
Richard, what's your view of how the government raises sufficient revenue in the bright future that we are hurtling towards?
It goes back to the technology. One size doesn't fit all. I mean, you can see the revenue coming from fuel tax going down. So how do you do that? Do you charge at the point of consumption? Do you put some type of tax on electricity? Honestly, it's not clear. Do you do it on the vehicles? Do you do it on the road? There's many ways to do it. But exactly as Graeme said, the key point is to have some visibility of what's going to come along. It almost back to the previous question about horses for courses. That's part of the horses for courses discussion. People will want some certainty, particularly in terms of the investments that people are making over the long term, both the consumer and also the manufacturers.
Do we know what the whole is going to be, actually, Graeme? This is a question from Mark Matches, a very good question, who works with KTN. Has anyone quantified the whole that the Exchequer faces?
No, I've not seen a number quoted. Whether that in itself is suspicious or not, I'm not sure.
No, I haven't either. So that will have to hang there. It's a very good question anyway. Here's a question for all of you. Antonio, maybe start with you. What mobility solutions do you currently use? What would you consider investing in for your future mobility? So it sort of turns around what Graeme's saying about consumers not knowing what to view yourselves as consumers, which you all presumably are. What do you trust and not trust at the moment, Antonio?
So currently, as you hear, I'm French. I'm working in the UK, and Antonio is coming from Spain. So I'm driving over 20,000 miles per year. So I am a diesel driver currently,
right?
Because I want to put only fuel once. But I already have ordered my next car, and it will be an hybrid one to combine the long journey with the city journey.
Richard, what about you?
No, I've driven a hybrid for many years. It's super reliable. It's easy. It reduces your consumption. That's where we are in terms of my lifestyle with family. Going away previously before COVID, the restriction on range is an issue for me. So until we resolve that issue either with BEVs or with fuel cell or something, then I'll stick with hybrids or plug-in hybrids.
Graeme, what about you?
Well, when we're not in lockdown, I'm a relatively high mileage user, not as cosmopolitan as Antonio. So I normally drive a very efficient internal combustion car, but I can see myself moving towards hybrid very shortly. And then when the structure's there for charging, then we have a great new iX car coming later this year, which I'm particularly attracted at the moment.
Okay. Let me put this possibly first of all to you, Graeme. It's from Ward Vliegen from Agoria. Should the automotive industry also not look at two other drivers for change? The first of those is that fewer and fewer consumers are in favour of owning a car, especially in cities, and the second is that cities across Europe take more control on the mobility in their area, so they're going to reduce the dominance of cars in favour of softer mobility solutions. So in that circumstance, even a BEV not really desired in many cities. This is basically, it's a car, it's causing congestion, it requires space, etc., etc. To what extent have we got to take into account those things as well, Graeme?
Oh, no, totally. I mean, we discussed in one of the earlier questions the subscription model. And within our group, we have a lot of experience with a product called Drive Now, which we launched a number of years ago, which was effectively a program where you have an annual subscription, which is very low, but you can pick a car up on the street with an app, and you can drive it however many minutes or miles you want. And what we found from that, and even now, that it's about consumer acceptance. The consumer desire for those products at the moment is not as strong as maybe some of the media would believe it to be. They're definitely part of the future, and I think it's important we've got a mix. You know, there will be some customers, probably like myself, that will always want to own their product and have access to it, and there'll be many more that are quite happy just to have access to a vehicle when they need it, and maybe a different type of vehicle for their daily use from the weekend. So, you know, as an industry, we are constantly evolving those products. But my feeling is at the moment, the consumers aren't quite ready for that as a significant percentage of their driving experience.
Yeah, I love Drive Now. I used to drive around all over the place, and I was very disappointed when it stopped. Richard, what's your answer to that same question? That business of the extent to which in cities consumer demand, the demand actually of the cities, of the cityscape, of the people who organise those cities, is going to be the overriding concern?
I don't think it'll be the overriding concern. I'm sorry, I'm going to echo exactly what Graeme said. I was living in Brussels for the last 6 years. You know, car parking's reduced less than the head count. Many of the younger people don't have driving licenses, or if they do, they don't own a car. So you can definitely see that movement going. But on the other hand, most of the people in Europe are living in small towns where they want mobility. And the acceptance of, you know, sharing a car, I think we can all logically understand it, but emotionally, I'm not sure people are ready to start giving up their own car so they can jump in it at any time and personalise it or leave it as they want to do it. And I'm not convinced. I don't think we've seen the data yet that says, yeah, people are ready or the market's ready.
What makes them ready, do you think?
I think a change in culture. I think a change of environment. You know, are the alternatives more applicable? Again, living in Brussels, going around Europe, you can see a huge cycling infrastructure. So would I use my bike around the UK to work? Probably not so much, because of the danger. If you create alternatives, people may take them. And the same with cars. So at the moment, you know, you need something that's very flexible so people can work around it. Because at the end of the day, mobility is important to everybody, but it's got to work within their life.
I suppose that's the point, isn't it, Graeme? If we are talking about things that work within people's lives and some kind of tipping point happening, it's what that tipping point is. I mean, you know, from my own lifestyle here in London, I do use car clubs, and I'm kind of, because I'm not going on very long journeys, and crucially for me, and I wonder if a lot of consumers would say this, actually I need to be able to see them outside the door. There needs to be a kind of visibility, doesn't there? A kind of a normality about it that makes you then take the step.
I think you're right. I think we've always got to be a bit cautious because we're of a certain generation, if I may be so bold. So, you know, for us growing up, owning a car was the first big step to adulthood. So I don't think I'd ever be without my own vehicle. But my daughters are very different. You know, one doesn't yet have a driving license. She's nearly 30 because she doesn't need to, because she's got a good public transport infrastructure. The other is quite an effective user of car club type products because that suits where she lives. So I think there's the emotional and the practical. It's partly driven by cost, but mostly driven by ease. So I mentioned Drive Now earlier. It didn't work so successfully in London, but it's worked brilliantly in some European cities where parking is at a premium. So if you do want access to individual mobility, quite often owning your car is massively expensive for a young driver. So using a car club type product is the way to go. So, you know, I think if you're in a heavily populated conurbation where there's access to vehicles through those kind of mechanisms, then they will grow. But I personally don't see that replacing the traditional ownership or leasing model. But then again, maybe not in my lifetime. Maybe in future generations it will.
Another question. This is yes.
No, if you allow me to add a detail on this point. So electrical car sharing is something who is existing since several decades in Paris, and everybody who was there know how discussing some car can be. So there is also a cultural behavior behind this sharing, and of course, as the city are growing, the number of people using sharing will grow, but percentage-wise, I doubt that this will be the mainstream.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, well, that's probably where we should leave it because I think we're just about out of time, but a fascinating conversation. Apologies again to those questions I didn't manage to get to. Huge thanks to our panellists. Thank you all very much indeed.